Today's episode of Socially Democratic is now available on Patreon. Join our socially democratic community for free or for as little as $2.50 a month, and you can help support the show. And when you sign up as a campaign organiser, you get access to our premium episodes, a free ticket to one of our live shows, and of course, not forgetting our Haters Hate and the Rest Vote Labor merch. And when you do sign up, please check your inbox for a message from our producer, who will no doubt be asking you for your shipping address so we can send out the merch to you. Today's episode is also brought to you by Dunn Street. Dunn Street is a campaign agency that specialises in community organising. We only work with people who want to build power to make the world a better place. We develop community engagement strategies to win campaigns, both big and small. And we train engagement staff and volunteers in the Marshall-Gantz framework of leadership, organising and action. And if you want to get your community to act, then hit us up at dunstreet.com.au. Today's episode is also brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. Maurice Blackburn believe the law should serve everyone and not just those that can afford it. They've been fighting for workers' rights in Australia for more than 100 years, and they've helped more than 500,000 people get the compensation they deserve. And if you've been injured at work or on the road, you may have a claim through your superannuation. So for expert and empathetic legal support, please call Maurice Blackburn Lawyers today. Hello and welcome to another episode of Socially Democratic, your weekly centre-left politics and organising podcast that drops every Friday and dives into the progressive campaigns of the day and the people leading them from home and abroad. And we're continuing to be abroad. In fact, I'm abroad right now over here in the United States. And this is our third episode of our US presidential election weekly recap with Katie Parsons and Ross Morales Rocketto. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and make sure you follow Socially Democratic on all of our social media platforms, including YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. All right, let's get to today's episode. We are taping this one on a Wednesday afternoon on the lands of the Lenape people, which once was known as New Amsterdam, and people now know it as New York City. And joining me on the line on pretty much the same time zones for the third, but not the final time, but certainly the final time before Americans vote, is a Democratic consultant based out of Chicago. She's been on the show plenty of times before. Katie Parsons, welcome back to Socially Democratic, Katie.
Hiya.
And he is the co-founder for Run for Something and White Dudes for Harris, Ross Morales Rocketto. Welcome back to Socially Democratic, Ross.
Howdy.
Very Texan. Love it. Okay, let's get into today's episode. It's only 6 days until D-Day or E-Day, however you want to call it. And, you know, I've only been on the ground here for 24 hours and I already feel the tension, even though I'm in New York City, which is a blue state. But certainly there's been some things that's happened in the last 6-7 days since we all spoke in the last episode. 3 things that we'll talk about in this episode. The Trump Nuremberg rally that was at Madison Square Garden earlier in the week. The Washington Post not endorsing a presidential candidate in their editorial for the first time since the 70s, and talk about the interference there. And last night, Vice President Harris made her closing argument in Washington, D.C. in front of the White House at the Ellipse. And we'll talk a bit about that. To the rally that was in New York City earlier in the week, Donald Trump and the MAGA nation descended upon a very, very blue, deep blue city in a very, very deep blue state. And just talking to friends here in New York City who were sort of saying, you know, New Yorkers were sort of a bit aghast seeing so many red hats and, you know, Trump swag descend on Madison Square Garden in Midtown during the week. And then obviously came out of it. I made the joke at the start, it was a Nuremberg rally, and I'm not joking. Like, it literally was just, you know, hate-filled speeches, one after the other, by some of the worst identities within the you know, the hard right of the Trump world. Now, Ross, normally we get one of you guys to do the, you know, 3 crazy things that Trump said this week. Well, your homework was done in one bloody rally. I just want to get your reflections, first of all, on why did Trump choose Madison Square Garden and New York City to do this particular rally, and then we'll get to some of the inflammatory remarks that came out of it.
To be honest, maybe Katie has a better sense than I do. I actually am I was perplexed when I found out he was doing a rally at Madison Square Garden, other than the fact that like maybe he liked the sort of like he liked the parallel to the Nazi rally back in the 40s at Madison Square. And I'm not even kidding. Like, that's the kind of shit that campaign would pull. I don't see a compelling reason why he would do it there other than just like he wanted to be able to say he filled Madison Square Garden, which is just stupid. And that whole rally was stupid. Like, everything about it was dumb. It seems like it was a complete mess. If you read sort of like the reports from it, like people within his orbit are all pointing fingers at each other for how some of these things like got into the vetted remarks and ended up on a teleprompter. Like a bunch of the stuff that got said that was horrible was on prompter. It like wasn't even like off the cuff. And we'll probably talk about this a little bit later, but I think like it mostly wasn't consequential except for the stuff around Puerto Rico. And I think it's entirely possible that Trump just handed Pennsylvania to the Democrats. Fingers crossed. He had been making inroads with the Puerto Rican community. There's a large Puerto Rican community in Pennsylvania. He had been cultivating like artists of Puerto Rican descent. The campaign had been doing a ton of outreach to Puerto Rican men. And then the comments happened from the quote unquote comedian. And that has penetrated in a way that I was just like wasn't totally sure it would. Some people who I think were probably not going to come out and endorse anyone have now come out and endorsed so like major Puerto Rican artists like Bad Bunny and Don Omar. I think like Don Omar is Bad Bunny has been a little political in the past. Don Omar has not really ever been political in the past, and like those are two of the largest Puerto Rican artists in the world. And so I think like the idea that those remarks somehow made it in specifically targeted at a core demographic that the Trump campaign has been reaching out to is just absolutely absurd. But you know what? Like, we'll take it. It was only a matter of time before they like made some major slip ups. But yeah, I just honestly, I find the whole thing perplexing. And, as evidence that some of the remarks were vetted, somebody leaked to the press in Trump's orbit that they like removed the C word, like calling Kamala Harris the C word from somebody's remarks because they thought it was like off color or in bad taste. I think that was the quote. It was in bad taste. So I don't know. Like the whole thing was in bad taste. There was like a watermelon joke, like specifically targeted around like towards like Black people. It just like the shit that they did at that rally was absolutely insane. And then when you compare it to, Kamala Harris's 75,000 person rally at the Ellipse, I think it stands in pretty stark contrast.
Katie, this sort of backgrounding from the Trump campaign now saying that, they're all pointing fingers at each other. Do you buy that? I mean, I just feel like there is sorry, I should clarify that. I always think there is intentionality in the Trump campaign that they do stuff, they gaslight to get a reaction from liberals, to then point to middle America to say, see, they're the weirdos, right? And it's like as if it's baked in a way. And I just don't buy this whole, we didn't know about this. I think they knew.
Oh, I mean, clearly some people knew. But this is, I think, really emblematic of a debate that's been happening within the Trump team, kind of, certainly for many months, maybe through the whole time. If you read about the kind of different advisors on his team, they're the people who have been encouraging him to be more restrained. Much earlier in the summer when Biden was still the other candidate, there were efforts to get Trump to talk using more like unifying language and trying to be a president for all and adopting some of that language. And then there's the other group of advisors on his team who really lean into the letting Trump be Trump, the more vulgar, kind of wandering, scattered, and nonsensical, the better, because it certainly appeals to some people. And this kind of felt like all of that spilling out into one event and onto the national scene. Russ, you were saying like, why would he do this at Madison Square Garden, which is it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, except that, remember, like, ego. I think Trump totally just wanted to say he could fill the room, like you said. Remember, he has this background in professional wrestling too, and Madison Square Gardens is very much like, the type of venue where pro wrestling or boxing or things like that happen. So it's a big spectacle event. And he used to be a New Yorker, so I'm sure this place has some importance to him. It feels like, just from having been on campaigns, it feels like you've got a principal, your candidate, who's like, I want to do it here, and nobody has the guts to argue him out of it, and so it becomes a big thing. You all do it, and nobody was really in control. I mean, for the last couple of weeks, everybody's been trying to grab the headlines. It's all about stunts and big moments and who can grab the media cycle for the longest. And I think in that case, going to New York maybe makes some sense, just like Kamala going to Texas, right? It's not about winning voters in that state, but about making a splash in the national news. But this has been a disaster for him. Like a true disaster. The McDonald's thing, yeah, we could spin it as something that was negative, but that was not in any way a disaster for him. This was.
I did see people on Twitter when it first happened saying Trump's has just lost the election. And I'm like, yep, you've made those calls before. Like, we've been there before.
Yeah.
Like the Access Hollywood tapes. In any other normal candidate, that's it. You're done. It's over. You're not even running anymore. You're withdrawing, and you're going to spend more time with your family. That kind of crap.
Well, and he said offensive things about essentially every group of people in the country at some point. So I was like you, Russ. I didn't necessarily think it was going to shift things, but like he didn't offend Germans. He picked one of the most like cohesive groups of people who like really take strong pride in their ethnicity and in that culture. And so it's just like, pick a different one. The other thing, it was such a big contrast. Kamala had been in Pennsylvania the same day, really focused on reaching out to the Puerto Rican community, talking about policies that would just specifically benefit, certain folks in the community. And so it was, I don't think that was on purpose, that like the Trump team knew she was going to be talking to them and inserted this as a I don't think that happened. But for Bad Bunny to have been able to post the video from Kamala speaking directly to the Puerto Rican community was incredible.
Let's talk about Vice President Harris's rally that happened last night. This time, for those in Australia, it doesn't really matter anyway. It happened this week. I'm not going to do the time zone things. Now, it initially had been billed to be in front of 55,000 people. Ross, you're telling me it's more, in the end it was more than that. It was like upwards of 75,000 people, which is a pretty remarkable set of numbers. In the address, she framed up Trump as this sort of petty tyrant, but reached out to Trump voters as well and sort of said, look, you may not vote for me, but I will always listen to you as your president. I just want to, maybe I'll go to you, Katie, and then Russ will get your remarks as well. Speak to me about, first of all, the intentionality of the location upon which this rally was held, and also her remarks about the intentions about reaching out across the aisle to people that would not historically vote for her.
Yeah, the physical location was really an opportunity to highlight, this enemy within language that Trump has been using, and reaching back to, I think it was at the ellipse where what was it, Russ? He like called for the National Guard to come in.
It was
I'm
it
trying to
was
remember.
it was the rally. It was the January 6th rally, and then they like marched from the ellipse to the Capitol.
Right. Okay. Right. And then I think there was another thing there too, but you're right. It's the January 6th bit. Right. So this is all pointing to Trump as a fascist, the physical space. The interesting thing is that, again, there's been, debate within our side about whether that's really the angle to take to talk more about Trump as a threat to democracy, as a fascist, or focus more on things like abortion, creating opportunity for all, the kind of messages that we know are working really well for us. So it was interesting to see that she went to the ellipse with all of the symbolism of the space. She did call back to January 6th and Trump's language in the past, but then she pretty quickly moved on to making her positive case, like you said, reaching out to potential persuadable voters.
Ross, the point that Katie just mentioned there before about this internal debate within the Democratic Party about where do we spend our time talking? Are we talking about our positive plans for the American people, or do we spend a bit of time reminding folks about what's at stake in terms of democracy? And I noticed in this Siena poll during the week that 7% of voters said democracy was the most important issue for them. And it's something that I'd thought about over the course of this campaign. Are we getting a little bit, or is the narrative of the campaign getting a little bit lost in that kind of stuff when you think about middle America who just wants to get on with their lives? Because I wonder if they just assume that all politicians are, crazy and whatever and obsessed and inside the Beltway and all that Washington stuff, this drain the swamp, whatever you want to call it. Whereas when a campaign talks about the things that I confront every day, cost of living pressures, all that kind of stuff, then I'll start to listen. Just want to get your reflections on where the party should be focusing their attention in the final 6 days.
I think it's in all of the above. I think like in no other election, this actually feels more like an election that could have happened in like 2008 or like 2004 than it does in 2024, with like sort of the way that folks in both campaigns have been focused on the media cycle and getting their narrative out. Like, and, like it hasn't been, we talked about this, not necessarily through traditional like news necessarily, but like they are trying to capture the cycle in ways that I think feel more reminiscent of an older school campaign. They're trying to create moments and like get the attention and all that stuff. I don't know that matters, but it is very clear that the campaigns, that both of them think it matters. And so I think this is one of those elections where we have to do everything all the time, all at once, because like we just don't know what's going to impact the final outcome. I think it makes sense for her to be talking about January 6th and drawing contrasts and all that stuff, because that's like that's Trump's biggest liability. I think like for better or for worse, like that's the thing that people really dislike. And that's the thing that moved a lot of Republicans and like moderate Republicans and, like the Adam Kinzingers and the Liz Cheneys of the world, like over to the Democratic side. And like I actually know Republicans who like abandoned the party like after January 6th. And I know that I'm sure there are undecided voters who being reminded of January 6th makes them more likely to not vote for Donald Trump. Whether it makes them more likely to vote for Vice President Harris, I don't know. I haven't seen, I just haven't seen polling data broken down in that level of granularity to know if it is actually moving, but like people to us, but like in an election that's going to be this close, moving people away from Donald Trump is just as valuable as us moving people over to our side, to be totally and completely honest. If we can keep a bunch of these people at home, or we can just get them to leave the top of the ticket blank and vote for their senator, in places like Pennsylvania, Arizona, et cetera, then I think like that's probably good for us overall. even though it is a little bit cynical to say it out loud. But yeah, I think that like ultimately, I think we have to be saying everything to everyone right now. And I understand why they're doing it. And I think it's tough because, as we've discussed before, the economic message is just harder for us because it begs the question: what have you done over the last 4 years? And honestly, I think that's probably Trump's strongest economic message, is just like continuing to remind people that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have been running the country for the last 4 years. And so I think it's a little bit of a tightrope, to be honest. And it's probably, and I'm sure positive, it's why they're also being so specific when they talk about the economy. They're talking about like the first time homebuyer tax credit. They're talking about the child care tax credit. They're talking about the cost of care and having Medicare cover, like in-home care workers, which honestly, like, I think everyone agrees. I don't think I truly don't. I have not run into a person who's like, oh, that's a terrible idea, including Republicans. So, I think like we got to be everywhere doing all the things right now.
And to be fair, I mean, she certainly, I mean, the majority of her remarks in that speech last night were focused on the latter that you just mentioned there, Ross. She did talk mostly about, this economic argument that she's making to voters and how her presidency will be different. And it's also interesting to note that, both campaigns are trying to create this contrast in which they're saying they are the change candidate. Trump's pitching to voters that Kamala Harris is associated with the past and that she's tied to the current regime with Joe Biden. Whereas Harris is trying to say, no, I'm change and Trump is the past because he is a former president and he represents chaos. And what you want is just normalcy in your life with your government. And that's what I can present. So it's just funny seeing how both of them are trying to both grab this storyline about change, and whether voters are buying that or not, I guess we'll find out in 6 days' time. But it is interesting how this is starting to, as time goes on, these arguments are just coming down to these very, very basic binary kind of pitches. Just want to get one more reflection before we go into some of the main things that we normally do each week. The Washington Post this week chose not to endorse a candidate for the first time since the 1970s. If they had in their editorial endorsed a candidate, which you would assume would have been an endorsement for Vice President Harris, it wouldn't have made any news, because who the hell is reading the editorial page of the Washington Post to decide whether or not they're going to vote for Harris or Trump? But the fact that they didn't, and they did it so late, and then the stories coming out from sort of the editorial staff that there was interference by the owner of the Washington Post, Jeff Bezos, then now it's a story. I'll go to you first, Katie. Any reflections on this in particular? Like I said, it wouldn't have been a story, right?
Right. No. I think that's absolutely right. And Bezos is trying to say that this is a principled decision. I think the thing that disturbs me most about Bezos so first of all, he says that it was a principled decision. For the purposes of argument, to be interesting, let's just assume we don't believe that. I think what really troubles me is that I have to imagine the calculation is, okay, it looks very likely that Trump could win. And I, as a person who has, massive business interests far beyond Washington Post, don't want to piss off the future president who has threatened to use the Justice Department to prosecute my enemies. Right. That's kind of the only rationale I could see, because if Kamala's not going to do anything to him if he were to back Trump. So it's just it's a really disturbing sign of the kind of chilling effects of what Trump's threats can do. It's honestly kind of amazing that more people haven't held back in criticizing him out of that fear so far. But it's kind of terrifying, because if he does become the president and does all of the things that he has threatened to do, I think you'll see a lot more of that in the future. One other just like interesting thing we've seen: more than 200,000 people have canceled their subscriptions to the Washington Post out of protest for this, which is kind of sad in a way, because the Washington Post, it's an important newspaper of record, and like most journalistic endeavors at this point, none of them are making enough money to really operate and do investigative journalism. If you want to attack Jeff Bezos, cancel your Amazon Prime subscription. That is the thing that would actually send a message. And unfortunately, nobody's really doing that, or at least I haven't seen, record numbers. But if you want to send a message, that's what I recommend.
Ross, you literally are in Washington. How's it gone down inside the Beltway?
People are pretty pissed. I think there's two ways to think about it. One is it's kind of a nothing burger, because like most voters don't care and aren't going to care about it, which is unfortunate, but it is what it is. I think it does send a message about the independence of the Washington Post. And, like primarily the Washington Post is like a coastal like publication at this point. And so I think Katie is right. If people really want to get back at Jeff Bezos, they should cancel their Amazon Prime subscriptions. I neither canceled my Washington Post nor my Amazon Prime subscription. I did think about the Washington Post one once I heard that a bunch of people were doing it. I probably won't. I'll probably get yelled at for saying it. I'll still continue to read the Washington Post, but I take their editorial page less seriously than I did, a few weeks ago. Yeah, like I think knowing that Jeff Bezos is sort of like getting into the weeds on the editorial side is like not great. But I think at the end of the day, the Washington Post has not, this isn't a media podcast, so we don't need to go in to the specifics, but like in all of the ways that the New York Times has done a really good job of adapting to the new media environment that we find ourselves in, the Washington Post has sort of been the opposite. And I think it's a demonstration that like, just because you are a tech billionaire and can like run like a tech company and do a good job like doing that, doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to translate into like other businesses. And Jeff Bezos is on the Washington Post now for a couple of years, and they're not doing any better than they were than when he first took it over. So I think this was a strategic mistake for him. I think he depreciated his own asset, and it was completely an unforced error. Jeff Bezos was never really in danger of getting prosecuted or anything by Donald Trump. Like, he's too rich for that. It's just like when you're as rich as he is, like, there's no consequences for any actions. And so the idea that like somehow there'd be consequences for anything he did, like, it's absurd. And, like, it probably has more to do with his other business interests than it does anything else. Amazon Web Services is one of the largest providers of cloud computing services to the federal government, especially to the Department of Homeland Security and stuff like that. So I think, I think it probably had to do with Amazon more than it did the Washington Post.
Let's turn to our regular segments for our US presidential podcast series, starting with what we call Insider Baseball, brought to you by WB Mason. Who else but WB Mason are our sponsors this week? Which Katie told me in the break she's never even heard of WB Mason, but they're literally like, their trucks are everywhere, and they like sponsor that. They're on the Green Monster at Fenway Park.
Huh.
It must be just a Northeast thing. Anyway,
I'm not a coastal elite. What can I say?
Exactly. Just a flyover state. Just a flyover state. Katie, what your Insider Baseball chat for this week? What have you picked up?
Yeah, it's more just like a mishmash of things because I don't have a lot of big insider things to talk about. So, one, I did some canvassing this weekend. It's actually, I mean, I'm kind of embarrassed to say that was my first time on the doors this cycle. I was in small town Wisconsin in a place that went for Trump only a little bit last time. And I think it was a perfect example of, Russ, what you were talking about, where it's such a truly polarized community. You have even in that small town an extremely active and very cute Democratic headquarters and Democratic Party, just like the cutest campaign office I've ever seen in my life. And then also plenty of Republicans who were voting there and clearly winning. And I was out on the doors. I was in kind of more of a working class neighborhood, and it was pretty much 50-50. And not necessarily, as I opened the door, would I have been able to guess how a person was going to vote based on, the kind of normal things that you would use to guess. So it was just really emblematic of everything we're seeing in the polls, which is things are really tight and people sort of allegiances are shifting.
Katie, can I ask you,
Yeah.
were these conversations meant to be persuadable conversations, or was it actually registered Democrats you're supposed to be knocking on?
Yeah, so I've been asking everybody, like, what is this list really? And because the people in these campaign offices don't know who you are, and if you're just a random volunteer who knows anything about the meat that goes behind the sausage or not. So they did tell us this is meant to be a GOTV universe with still some persuadables. So, they set that expectation. I still don't know how many supporters actually have been ID'd or are just modeled. Going back to something Ross was talking about, a couple of calls ago, and I've been trying to get that. So I'm headed out to Pennsylvania on Friday to a very rural area where we're just going to be focusing on turnout, I hope. But again, I'm like, are these ID'd? And I don't know. So the one thing that made me very happy, everybody was very nice. Even the people who were supporting Trump were very polite. And while that doesn't mean we should, rejoice or anything, we've heard a lot anecdotally about kind of increasing violence or even just rudeness at the doors when you run into a Trump voter as a Democrat. And I was very happy to see that wasn't it wasn't evident at all, actually, where I was. And none of the other folks in the group I was canvassing with experienced that either. But it's also Wisconsin, so we're in Midwest nice territory.
I was going to say, is there such as I'd never heard of a rude person from Wisconsin. So
yeah. Yeah. Just one other thing as far as insider stuff, harking back to kind of the nature of fractured media, which Ross, you've talked about a lot. One thing that's kind of astonished me in the last week, and we didn't even talk about it as one of the main events in the campaign world this week, is that Kamala did a rally in Texas with Beyonce, like Queen of the Universe, right? And this made barely a blip in any social media that I follow. It was barely mentioned in the news. I mean, of course, I'm sure there were stories written about it, but I think that's the kind of thing that would have dominated a cycle, a news cycle, a year ago or even just a couple months ago. And it's, a nothing burger, with the exception of, I'm sure, some specific audiences that she's trying to reach. I think there was a lot more focus just on the messaging around abortion, which is a good thing. I think in many ways that's actually going to be more persuasive for voters. But I think it's still a pretty surprising thing to have happened.
I wonder if that speaks to a fractured media, or the fact that Beyonce's her reign as queen has been dethroned by Taylor Swift. Could that be what's going on, perhaps? Anyway, who knows?
You
Ross,
said it, not me.
Oh, the hate mail will come in, but also now I've just got all the Swifties on board. So, the swings and roundabouts in this scenario. Ross, what's your insider baseball chat you want to share with us?
No comment on that. I think I really want to go back to I've been watching a lot of football and baseball because it's the World Series going on right now, the LA Dodgers versus the New York Yankees, and we're in the middle of football season. Because of that, I've gotten to see a lot of ads. But something that they often talk about in all sports is that the thing that makes a good team a great team is that they are really good at the situational part of the sport. So people call it situational football. So you're in a very specific situation. How does your team execute during that very specific type of situation? And basically the teams that do better in those very specific situations tend to do better and win Super Bowls and shit like that. So I think that's why I want to go back to the Puerto Rico stuff, because it's similar in politics. The campaigns that win versus the campaigns that lose are the campaigns that make the most of the situations that are presented to them. And I think it wasn't just that the Trump campaign squandered an opportunity. It was that the Harris campaign was ready to pounce on it. They clearly had already been talking to folks like Bad Bunny and Don Omar. They'd clearly already been doing a ton of work in the Puerto Rican community in Pennsylvania. I know they had a big rally after the Puerto Rican Day Parade a few weeks ago that thousands and thousands of people were at. And if they hadn't been already focusing on this group of people, and they wouldn't have been able to take advantage of this opportunity. And so, look, does it mean we're going to win? I don't know. But it is an indication that the campaign was doing some of the things that they needed to be doing already. And that when a moment presented itself, they were able to take advantage of it in a way that I think made it a much bigger deal than it would have been otherwise if they hadn't been already sort of working, doing a lot of work in the Puerto Rican community. And so I think those are the types of things that help us win elections, to be totally honest. And I think we are having more of those moments than the Trump campaign is. And, does that mean we're going to win for sure? It doesn't, but it does mean that, I would still rather be us than them. I feel every day I sort of think about it and look out and I'm yeah, I would still rather be us. I wouldn't trade places with them. I just I still think we have a better shot, even though I say out one side of my mouth, it's 50-50. And out of the other side of my mouth, I'm it's, we have, it looks like we might, I would rather be us than them. So, yeah, at the end of the day, I think we are having more of those moments than they are. And I think we will continue to have more of those moments than they are, if for no other reason than just their campaign is bad. They have a poorly run campaign.
Let's just a little housekeeping sorting out there, literally. Let's turn to our next segment, which is our Swing State Spotlight. This week it's brought to you by Arby's. We have the meat. Katie, you have been tasked. Well, actually, you put your hand up for this one. You chose Nevada, the Silver State, in our Swing State Spotlight. Tell us about the Nevadians and what's going on there.
Home means Nevada. So first key about Nevada is that only if you are not from Nevada do you pronounce it Nevada. It is the first thing we train all out-of-state volunteers from California to do. It's a wonderful state. it's really weird. So Nevada has 6 electoral college votes. I was reading something. I didn't know this before. They're like, in one sense, the most powerful voters in the country, because you only need 230,000 voters to win an electoral college vote in Nevada, where it's more like 290,000 votes needed to win an electoral college vote in the other states. So, every vote really counts there. It's not the most likely tipping point state, but it's going to be really critical to making up those last couple of votes, which is obviously why it's a battleground state. It's also just a really swingy state. It's something like 30% of voters register as an independent there. There's just a really strong spirit of independence. And, when you think about like the pioneers going out west and cowboys and that kind of stuff, I think Nevada, whether it truly is emblematic of that or not, they really like to believe that about themselves. So you've got that big number of independent voters. For the last 20 years, Democrats have won the state. Harry Reid built a massive machine there. Labor is also incredibly powerful in Nevada. And unlike the Rust Belt states, where most of the union power is more like old school manufacturing, maybe transportation, the unions in Nevada are more like social service oriented, or basically tied to the casinos. So the culinary union is very large and very powerful. They've always been extremely effective at turning out voters and a big presence on the doors, even when the party hasn't been as strong. So all of that said, early voting has started in Nevada, and Republicans are up a lot. They've got a 5% lead. Their mail-in ballots have come in, particularly from the rural counties, in a way that they never have in the past. And so, there's been a lot of talk about Trump shifting the way that he talks about early voting and mail-in voting. And I think Nevada is, you're really seeing the power of that this time, and that they've gotten their votes in. The kind of silver lining, hopefully, is that there's still many Democrats who haven't voted yet. So there's a lot of room to grow. Obviously, I would rather that they had already voted, but we have big gains to make, especially from younger voters who haven't turned out yet, also from women and people of color, all in the Las Vegas area for the most part. There's also some suggestion maybe that there's ballots that are still just kind of stuck in the mail. They haven't hit the county clerk's office yet. All of this, John Ralston is the person to follow if you really want to know anything about Nevada. I don't know how long he's been there at the Independent, but if you really want to read somebody's very nerdy blog about early voting in Nevada, look up his name. Yeah, I think those are the big things to know about Nevada.
Just to add to that before I go to Ross to do cover off Arizona, most recent polls, I mean, there's a lot that have been done at a state level in Nevada, but the CNN poll has Trump up by 1 point, and there's the YouGov poll that came out on the same day and surveyed over a similar time frame, has Harris up by 4 points. And the most recent one, which is Atlas Intel, it's hard to say, has Trump up by a point. Maybe we'll talk about it in the final reflections of the show as well. But sort of, I know a lot of folks are sort of freaking out about a lot of the early vote numbers, but certainly people are saying, well, it's just the Republicans finally switching over to this form of voting, and therefore these are high propensity voters that would normally vote anyway. They're just changing their voting method and they're voting earlier, so let's not freak out just yet. Ross, tell us about the Grand Canyon State in Arizona.
Yeah, so Arizona's 11 electoral college votes. Currently, the 538 average has Trump up by a little more than 2. We also have a competitive Senate race in Arizona with the Democratic candidate being Ruben Gallego going up against Kari Lake. Kari Lake, for those who probably don't remember, ran for governor and was honestly supposed to win that race pretty easily, and she ended up losing because she's kind of crazy. Ruben Gallego is currently up by about 6 percentage points in sort of like the 538 polling average. Like Arizona is a relatively large state. There's about 7.5 million people there. Of those, just like for folks to understand, about 4.7 million of them live in the Phoenix area. And overall, in 2020, Biden won by about 10,500 votes. So a lot of people there, but a very narrow margin of victory. Republicans have a voter registration edge in Arizona by quite a bit. And also the early vote numbers and mail numbers are also trending towards Republicans as of like a day or two ago. Does that mean we're going to lose Arizona? Who knows? I just have a really difficult time. I am not in the state. I've never worked in Arizona specifically. I have a hard time seeing who the Ruben Gallego Donald Trump voter is. I assume they must exist because he's up by 6 in the polls, so it looks like he's probably going to coast to victory. But I would love to have a better understanding of like who's voting for Ruben Gallego and Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
I'm positive that they exist. I think Arizona is going to be a really tough state for us to win again. To be totally honest, I wouldn't say like I feel the most hopeful about Arizona. I think it was the margin was so narrow last time, and I think Mark Kelly, who was like up in the Senate race last time, helped Joe Biden across the finish line. Theoretically, Ruben Gallego should be able to help this time, but it just might not be enough. But there's a lot of like effort going into Arizona from the campaign, from a lot of outside groups. But it's really about Phoenix and Maricopa County. I was taking a look, though, at some of the other sort of counties across the state before this. And, I think something that is also really important to note is that Joe Biden didn't lose. He only lost one other county in Arizona by more than a 70-30 margin. He was sort of like at 68, 65, 58, 55 in the other counties that he lost, and Trump was in those numbers in the counties that he lost. And so I think that's I'm probably looking at, can we squeeze, what's our margin in Maricopa County? I think we won it at the presidential level, like for the first time ever last cycle in 2020. I think the questions are going to be like, what does that look like this time around? Can we win Maricopa County, and are we going to get blown out in the other counties? And I think that's just like, we don't know the answer to any of those questions. And if we're going to get blown out 80-20, 90-10, we probably lose the state. If the margins are closer to 68-32, we've got a real shot. But this one's going to be a tough one. I think Arizona and Nevada are both not looking the best for us right now.
Okay, let's turn to our next section, which is obviously we talk about what gives you hope, blue skies ahead, or what's a red flag for you that's giving you worry. I'm going to name one just quickly. Jill Stein worries me. Third-party candidates in a very, very tight election. What does that mean? I don't want to have a whole Ralph Nader situation again. Ross, to you first. Blue sky or red flag? Which one do you want to go with today?
Well, you almost baited me into that, but I'm not taking the bait. I'm a pessimist by nature. I'm not a cynic, but I am a pessimist. And so something that Katie said earlier, which is being in Wisconsin and getting a walk packet with a bunch of persuadable voters in it, is a red flag for me. And like that shouldn't be happening at this point in the election cycle. We should be knocking on doors that we know are ID'd, that we know are going to vote for us at this point, and that's giving me real strong 2016 vibes. Like that's the kind of stuff that happened in 2016, and I don't want to be hearing that right now. I'm not hearing that out of Pennsylvania, which is where a lot of the people I know who are going right now. So I guess I also throw in a blue sky as like, it seems like the Pennsylvania lists are the lists that we would want them to be right now.
Okay, that's good. You've done well there, Ross. Katie, blue sky or red flag?
Okay, I'm going to try to do blue sky, red flag, and prediction all at the same time, which is that my record of making predictions on this show is really bad. I've been wrong in every single one of them because I've suggested where the smart money is, right? What are the polls telling us? What are sort of the typical trends saying are most likely to happen? And again, I think that the smart money, if you were removing all emotion from this, is that Trump is looking better in the polling. That is a major red flag. It's also a blue sky because I'm always wrong. And I think there are lots of reasons. We've talked about them, particularly the role of women, and that women turn out at higher rates, and there are more of them, and there are more of them registered, that give indications that the smart money may again be wrong.
It's funny, because when I think about my kind of final reflections before Tuesday, I keep coming back to a theory that I've held, has held up in every election since 2016. In that, in 2016, I think Democrats didn't take Donald Trump seriously and didn't vote, and ever since then they have. And I think that it constantly gives me faith in the sensibility of the American voter. Every time Trump has either been on the ballot or has been associated with the ballot, so midterms, out-of-cycle elections, Georgia runoff, you name it, whenever he's been associated with it, the sensibility of the American voter has won out because he's lost every time. And once again, I know the polls are close, but we're asking the sensibility of the American voter to shine through again. And I just feel like that they will do that on Tuesday. But to your point, Katie, yes, I also sat on the steps of St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City and did an interview with the ABC Washington correspondent the day before the election. She asked me who's going to win tomorrow, and I said Hillary Clinton will shit it in. And how wrong I was. But anyway, so these are my feelings that I have at this moment going into Tuesday. Ross, to you, just to wrap up, any other final reflections before we close out for the show?
You have more faith in the American voter than I do, and I appreciate your hopefulness. It's making me more hopeful.
Wonderful. To both of you, Ross and Katie, thank you so much for today's episode. Thank you for all of the episodes we've done this far. We haven't finished, obviously. We'll do a recap next week. Hopefully, fingers crossed, it'll be a very joyous recap. But until then, if those folks who live in the United States, please go and knock on some doors for your local Democratic candidate and or for the Democratic nominee for president, Vice President Kamala Harris. Best of luck to everyone, and we'll talk to you all next week.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Hey there. Thanks for listening to Socially Democratic. Did you like the podcast? Hit the follow or subscribe button and be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Podchaser. And to get all the latest updates on Socially Democratic, follow Dunn Street on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And we'll see you next Friday.